All right, so Slate, try that again. That was good. Hello all, and welcome to the channel. Maybe you're returning, welcome back. This channel has been active for quite some time. This is where I was posting a lot of my film stuff. It's just stuff I was working on, but today we're doing something very different because it has been an interesting couple of years. And I wanted to come on here and share this with you. I wanted to share with all of you my journey, coming back to the Catholic Church, or really coming to it for the first time. So before we get into it, before I share my testimony, I always like to share this quote from Saint Padre Pio. "Blessed is the crisis that made you grow, the fall that made you gaze up to heaven, the problem that made you look for God." It's a good reminder for me to just be focused on gratitude, have that attitude of gratitude, because at the end of the day, the Lord uses suffering. The Lord uses, He's used even my mistakes, my shortcomings, my pride, for the greater good. And so I'm immensely grateful for that. So I start with that quote to remind me of the gratitude, so I don't get too into self-pity or woe is me or any sort of victim mentality, because that's never a good thing. So, okay, as far as my Catholic upbringing, I am a cradle Catholic. However, was very lukewarm. Both of my parents were Catholic. They came from Catholic families. They made their sacraments. They went to Mass on Sundays, to my knowledge. My parents got married in the Catholic Church, and from there, they tended to the formation of myself and my siblings, but, just kind of going through the motions. I was baptized as a baby into the faith. Of course, I don't remember that much. I remember being in church. I lived in New York like the first 4 years of my life, and then we came out to California in the year 2004. And my earliest memories of being in church were in New York. I was a very small kid. I just remember it was the music. I was brought to tears by the music. I'm not sure why. I don't remember it being bad. Maybe it was that I did find it very moving, and it brought me to tears. So I don't know. I'm still not quite sure about that. It's just this one isolated memory I've got of being in a church in New York. In fact, I specifically remember my mom saying, like, "Oh, you're gonna bring him to church, like he's gonna start crying." So, okay, sometime later, about the age of 7, my dad tells me, "Okay, you have to start going to," he called it religious instructions, because you got to make your first communion. So I didn't really understand what that meant. I just knew that Dad said I have to do this, so I'm going to do it. So I would go to Mass with him on Sundays. He was the cantor, actually, so he was pretty involved in the music ministry. So I would go with him on Sundays, and at some point during the Mass, I would then go off and, do my training, a bunch of little kids, and I didn't pay attention. I was too busy thinking about Spider-Man and whatnot to have any sort of attention towards what I was being taught. But I remember being in church, and unlike my previous experiences where I was crying at the music, like I just found it very peaceful. I felt the love. I just like, this is a nice place. I feel the love here. I remember my dad telling me, like, "Oh, well, this is God's house." And I was like, this is where God lived? Like, that's incredible. Just very, the innocent twinkle in my eye of a 7-year-old kid. So I liked being there as a kid. It felt peaceful, but, going through the motions, I didn't fully understand the true presence. I never really even heard the term Eucharist until I was an adult, beginning to go through my conversion, reversion. It's a little complicated, because technically I am a cradle Catholic, but for all intents and purposes, I'm a convert, because coming into the faith as an adult, actively participating, learning, studying, I didn't know any of this as a kid. I did not know anything about the true presence, anything about, the saint. I didn't understand. So anyway, made my first communion, pretty much stopped going to Mass entirely. We didn't really go as a family, so it was just kind of radio silent, maybe sparingly throughout the years. We weren't even really a Christmas and Easter family. It was just kind of whenever we went, we went. So fast forward to, I'm now a teenager at this point, age 14, kind of the same deal. "All right, Stephen, you got to start going to classes because you got to make your confirmation." And I'm like, "All right, yeah, whatever you say." Like, that's what I got to do. This is what everybody does, right? So I'm going to go do this. Of course, I'm a teenager at this point, so the memories are fresher, but the daydreaming didn't stop. I was still a very avid daydreamer, always getting lost in my thoughts. But beginning to really know kind of the format of the Mass, there was this specific part that I would always just set aside for daydreaming time. I realize now that's called the homily. And then, of course, there's every socially anxious teenager's least favorite part of the Mass. Let us share with one another a sign of the Lord's peace. And that's when the awkward handshakes would ensue. So going to these confirmation classes, it was me, it was a bunch of other teens, probably in the same situation as me. I don't know. I'd like to hope that the Lord has touched them and that they have kept up with their faith. That being said, I have not really seen them very active in my community. I pray for them. I pray for their conversions. But yeah, I say that just to say that, we were all sort of just going through the motions of these confirmation classes. But my first little spark, a fire of love for the Lord, was during these confirmation classes. There was one point where we went on this retreat. I had never gone on a retreat at this point. Just the idea of it was, wow, we were going to this place called Big Bear in California. It was January, so it was snowy. I live in a desert, so we don't get snow very often. So just the sight of snow alone is like, wow, we're in some foreign land right now. But yeah, fun weekend with warmth, music, activities. We were keeping busy. I remember going like zip lining, rock climbing, it really did bring everybody together. I still have this distinct, actually somebody at my parish reminded me of this the other day. There was this distinct memory where there was fresh snow and, the kids were just having a snowball fight, and then the snow just came like coming down, and, we were all desert kids, so we'd never like experienced that, or at least most of us don't experience it on a regular basis. So all that to say, it was a really enlivening, fun weekend, and I was on fire, in the best way that I could be at the time. Somewhere during that weekend, I got in my head that God was a Santa Claus type figure. So I could go to him in prayer. Really, prayer was like my wish list. I remember after that retreat, I'd hit my knees every night and I'd say, all right, God, I'd say the Our Father and the Hail Mary, so at least there was that. But they were just words to me at that point. I heard them time and time again. I didn't fully understand what I was saying with those prayers. But, I'd hit my knees, I'd say those prayers, and then I'd be like, all right, God, give me this, give me this, give me this, give me all these things. So I thought God was just this figure meant to spread joy, very much like Santa Claus. So that was what I did. For the next couple of months, I would hit my knees and say these prayers and give God my wish list. And I thought, all right, he's going to give me all these things. I'm never going to struggle again. And so naturally, that didn't happen. I still struggled. I was a socially anxious teenager. I wasn't happy. And because I had still struggled, and, I had asked God, if I'm being real, I had asked God for very specific things. I had said, God, give me a girlfriend, give me just stuff like that, like what every lonely teenager wants. Give me a girlfriend, give me these friends, I didn't get those things. And so I just became very embittered. And I said, okay, prayer doesn't work. That was what I went around saying. Prayer doesn't work. I was already a very bitter teenager, always blaming others for things and just blaming others for my misfortunes. But now that was directed at God, because God didn't give me what I wanted. I look back and it's like, yeah, why? That's where I was. I really did not know any better. And, I was also one of those kids who saw confirmation as graduation. It's not. Confirmation is graduation from kindergarten. All right? Like, congrats, you've graduated kindergarten, but you still got a lot to do. We still got a lot more ways to go here. So after that, I basically never went to Mass, maybe 3 or 4 times, maybe at Christmas, never for Easter. So sometime after that, graduated high school, then I went to college, I went to a film school in Los Angeles. Moving out of my parents' house at 18 years old, I had free reign to do whatever I pleased, and my dad even advised me at some point, hey, just make sure you're going to church, make sure you're praying. And I probably told him, like, all right, but never had any intention of doing that. And I really thought that was the high point of my life. Being in LA, being at this film school, I thought, okay, in high school, I was very quiet. I was kind of kept to myself. I was always so afraid of judgment. Public school's rough. Public school's rough. So by the time I got to college, I was like, all right, I'm not going to be that. I'm not going to be this like quiet, anxious kid. I'm going to be more outgoing. So in college, I kind of put on this like false face of trying to just be the center of attention, noticeable. I turned to various vices, alcohol, parties, whatever drugs I wasn't afraid to try, lust. Pretty much everything I did was in the pursuit of pleasure and validation from my peers. I was kind of an underachiever. I did the bare minimum as far as the film work. My whole goal was just, how many people can I hook up with? How many parties can I go to? Can I be somebody? So not only did I not really put my best foot forward when it came to college and preparing for a career, and film is tough, okay? That's a tough career to get into. So in addition to all of that, it was 2020 was my last year. I graduated in 2021, so naturally I was affected by the pandemic. So all of that, after I graduated college, I had to just admit defeat, and I moved back home with my parents 2 months after I graduated, that quick. And from that point on was probably the lowest point in my life. It was a lot of spiritual desolation, a lot of isolation. I was able to find work pretty quickly, but that was pretty much all I was doing. I wasn't hanging out with people. I had not stayed in touch with friends from college, and a lot of those vices were still getting me, particularly lust. And I don't know, maybe I'll do a video on that, like my experiences with lust. And for the record, I say lust, I don't say, porn addiction, I don't say masturbation. I say lust because all of that falls under, one umbrella. It is the sin of lust, and that was my sin. It was lust. I won't go too into detail, but I had a tough time kicking it. It was what kept me going. I was just always focused on, okay, can I use this person to feel better? And it was never enough. The old saying, 1 is too many and 100 is never enough. I never liked the fact that I was acting on lust, falling again and again and again. I had wanted to stop. It was more so that, I wanted to stop. The truth is, I wanted to moderate it. I never had any intention of stopping completely. The idea of saving sex till marriage was, in my mind, you're a loser if you do that. You're doing that? I specifically remember judging people for doing that. Never did I think that was something I would believe in. So I had no intention of stopping. I had no intention of stopping my sinful behavior. But I wanted to moderate it. I wanted to do less of this and less of this. Pornography was the thing that I really wanted to get away from. I just thought, this is not really beneficial to me at all. I want to stop falling into that. But I couldn't stop. No matter what I did, I could not stop. And it was a lot of white knuckling, a lot of willpower, a lot of beating myself up, don't do it, which is never helpful. It's self-reliance, and I'm finite. I'm a human being. There's only so much I can do. So it was about a year or so of just this isolation, falling into lust, hating myself, where I was like, something has to change. What I'm doing is not working. I've got to do something radically different if I'm going to make it through this. And there was just one day, in the depths of my heart, I didn't hear a voice. I didn't hear a voice going into my ear. But I felt this presence. I felt the voice almost. And the voice said, start praying again, go back to church, and give God a chance. I didn't know where that came from. But I was like, all right, there's something, because I thought back to all the positive experiences I'd had in church up to that point. The warmth, the love. I didn't understand it, but I knew it was there. And I thought back to that retreat. Let's give this another go. Maybe I got something wrong. Maybe I was... You think I was wrong? Yeah, I was like, let's give this another shot. Let's give prayer a shot. Let's give God a chance. Of course, at that point, I thought, why is God going to want to listen to my prayers after I was so vocal for years about how prayer didn't work? I'd even gotten to a point where I was like, God isn't real. The universe. I was one of those guys where it's like, oh, the universe. So I thought, why is God going to have any sort of care about me praying? And what am I going to say? What the heck do I say after not praying for years, So I was actually also at the time on an accountability app to help me with my struggles, my struggles with lust. And I had connected with somebody on there and had shared with him my struggles and shared with him, like, hey, I think I want to like get back into prayer and get back into church, but I don't know where to start. And he gave me just this very simple prayer. He told me to sit on the floor, close my eyes, and repeat this prayer. God, I give myself to you. That's it. Just repeat that about 10 times or so, or whatever the heart desires. And so I was like, all right, let's give it a try. So I did that. I didn't really know what I was doing, but I gave it a try. And that was really where it began. For once, I wasn't praying for something selfish. I wasn't praying for me. I had put myself in the presence of God, and I gave him myself. I just took that leap of faith. I had no idea if he was listening. I had no idea if he wanted me, but I said that. I said, God, I give myself to you. I want to know you. I want you to help me because I need you. And that was really where it was. I think like finally that was the willingness, and as human beings, we have free will. And that was that's a whole other video where I had come to understand the concept of free will, because I think somehow I'd got it in my head that God was this like authoritative, like, you're going to do what I say or else, And so just learning about free will. Oh, here, let me just stay on track here. With that, I started to pray again. I started to, seek out help from my lust and thinking like, wow, okay, so God can and will, if I seek him, help me with my struggles. Like he wants to help me. I thought this is amazing, like God is the answer. God is the answer to my struggles, my vices, my loneliness. And from there on out, it was like, loneliness was starting to vanish. Boredom was starting to vanish. I'd spend time in prayer, or I'd spend time, or I was beginning to, so I didn't quite start going back to Mass right away. I did. I was finally beginning to go back to church. And at the time, I didn't understand, that, there's spirituality and then there's religion. There's both. They are complementary. At the time, I would say I was more spiritual, but I wasn't practicing the religion. But it was all I knew in my upbringing. I knew that I had to go to church on Sundays. Okay, so I started doing that, and I didn't quite get it. At that point, I was just trying to connect with God as I understood God. So when I had finally started going back to Mass regularly, was probably like November of 2022. We received word that my dad got his stomach cancer diagnosis, and praise be to God, he's fine now. He's healed. He is cancer-free. But that was when I was like, all right, no more procrastinating, no more once in a blue moon. I am going to go to church every Sunday. What better time to start? Well, really, I was still seeking God at that point. I didn't quite understand where Jesus factored into this. I didn't quite understand where Mary factored into this, or the Holy Spirit. I'm seeking God, which, praise to the Lord that he, I did not know what I was doing. I had no clue, but there was an earnest desire to seek God. And the Lord can use that. And he did. And for that, I am immensely grateful. But yeah, I had gone to Mass for the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, which was in December of 2022. And that was a big moment in my faith journey where I really understood free will. Feast of the Immaculate Conception, the reading was the Annunciation, of course. And they talked about Mary, Our Lady, freely saying yes to God. Like she fully consented to God's will for her. She chose that. And it blew me away. I had never, in reading the reading, I had not really read the Bible at that point, but, you read the story in Luke, Gospel of Luke, Mary, the angel comes to Mary, and he says, behold, you will conceive, you will bear a son. The first thing she says is, how can this be? And she doesn't say it out of disbelief, but like she's surprised. She asks a question. It's not an immediate like, okay, yes, be it done to me according to your will. She asks a question first because she's a human being. She has that freedom to say, how is this possible? In astonishment. And that was where it really clicked for me. Like, okay, God loves us so much that he gave us the freedom to choose to love him. And if we don't have that freedom, it's not love. It's forced on us. That's not love. Love is free, total, faithful, and fruitful. And I was just so blown away by that. I was so blown away. I think I really begun to comprehend God's love in that moment. We have free will. And God works with us. He has a perfect plan, but he works with us, and he allows us the freedom to make mistakes. He allows things to happen that are, and I think that was kind of where I'd begun to understand, not quite totally, but I'd begun to understand, okay, why do bad things happen to good people? And it's like, well, it's the world we're living in. God is not going to intervene in every little misfortune, but he will not let anything happen if it will not lead to some greater good. It was really after that Mass that I realized God is Father. He's not necessarily some, overpowering authority, do what I say. He's not a tyrant. That's the word. He's not a tyrant. But he's a Father, a loving Father, the most loving Father. And it was really after that Mass, I am so grateful. I'm just so grateful. I'm just grateful. Grateful to be remembering this. So I was really beginning to understand the heart of God the Father after that. I was turning to him in prayer every day. I started to love prayer. What started as this simple, God, I give myself to you, became this prayer routine. And the 12-step prayers are wonderful. If you don't know what they are, I highly encourage you to look them up. They're amazing prayers, especially if you're just getting started, maybe you don't know how to pray. I would highly recommend starting with some of them, the Serenity Prayer, the Third Step Prayer. And so I've begun to surrender my struggles to God, surrender my lust, and wow, was that so much different. Was that so much different? Because when I was trying to stop of my own free will, I'd have periods where I'd go, months without acting on it. But it was always such like a, it's like, again, it's white knuckling. It's like, I got to really force myself here. This is tough. This is, it was miserable. Like I was clean, but I wasn't happy, But in letting God into my vices and giving them to him, not only was I free of them, but I was fulfilled. I was happy. I was content. But the isolation thing, that was still, I still wasn't really hanging out with a lot of people. I really did not have anybody, except my family, during the couple of years after moving back home from college. It's sort of the pre-conversion time. So I knew something had to change on that front. Going through my dad's illness, taking care of him, it was a very difficult time in my life, even though I had found God at that point. So I said, okay, I really need to find people. And I had no knowledge of young adult groups at parishes, no foreknowledge. But I was like, okay, maybe they've got some kind of young adult group at my church. And sure enough, it was one day after Mass, on the bulletin, I saw this sign, a young adult group. And I'm like, oh, wow, all right, talk about God's providence. And so I texted the number on there. They said, okay, here's when we meet, come on by. And I did, and it was from there that I'd really begun to meet people in the faith. And I was still, I've told them because I still talk to some of them. Actually, I still go to the group sometimes. I told them recently, a couple months ago, I was like, I had no idea what you guys were talking about when I was first coming here. Because they were talking about Jesus and Mary. And it's like I said, I still didn't understand how they factored into this. How are they involved with God and God's plan? So it was through going to this young adult group that I had that desire. Okay, there's a lot more to this than I realized. And at that point, it's prayer was great, but I there was that thirst for more. There was a lot more to be discovered here about the heart of God. And it was through that young adult group that I had gotten connected to my parish's RCIA ministry. We call it OCIA now, so RCIA, Rite of Christian Initiation for Adults. OCIA's Order of Christian Initiation for Adults. Personally, I like RCIA better, but that's a discussion. So I began sitting in on these classes. Well, really, they'd said, hey, you could volunteer for these classes. I thought, all right, I'll just go there and sit in and help them out where I can. I didn't realize that it was quite a commitment. So my first year, I just kind of sat in. They still called me a volunteer, but I was not. I didn't know what was going on. But it was through that class that I had really, and it was such a nice curriculum. And it was from there that I began to learn more. I had begun to understand. There was this great video that I saw very early on in my time I forget what, I think like it's Brandon Vogt, Why Are We Catholic? Because It's True. I'll link it in the description. So it's through sitting in on these classes, going to Mass on Sundays, but specifically really paying attention to the scriptures, to the gospel readings, trying to understand Jesus. Where did Jesus factor into this? Like, okay, Jesus is God. Like, I didn't understand. And it was really just through that. And also just like being sent YouTube videos. I'll never forget the first time somebody sent me a Father Mike Schmitz video. I had not comprehended or even fathomed the idea of church being like an all the time thing. You're like, oh, this is more than just going to church on Sundays? And I really thank God for the YouTube community, Father Mike Schmitz, and shows like The Chosen, which helped me to understand the heart of Jesus a bit more, understand the stories in the scriptures a bit more. And yeah, it's just a lot of prayer, study, taking these leaps of faith, admitting, I don't know what I'm doing, Lord. I don't fully understand. But if this is what you say, this is what you say. And let's circle back to the true presence now, because I didn't quite understand that growing up. And this is kind of I don't want to open the can of worms here, but seeing people, as a kid, seeing people receiving communion, just like, okay, and they consume our Lord like he's a chip. like, oh, I'm eating a bag of chips, and seeing like Eucharistic ministers, I like just, okay, these people give, like, I was always told, okay, we eat the bread. It's not the bread, all right? It is bread at one point in time, but after that transubstantiation, that is not bread. But anyway, I didn't understand that, so I had not really learned about the true presence until I was an adult. And it's like, truly present body, blood, I don't know, like, because, and I had communion before, but I'd never, and that was my mindset of like, I had never felt anything in receiving communion. So it's like, I don't understand how they can be truly, why didn't I feel anything? And of course, learning about adoration, Eucharistic adoration, and I'll never forget the first public adoration I went to, and I didn't quite get it, I didn't quite understand, but I swear that hour felt like 20 minutes. Like so I knew something was going on, that there was more to this than I might have thought. Like there was a presence there that I couldn't explain. And it was really from that point on, it was really when I was finally like, all right, Lord, I don't understand this, but I accept it. And if this host is truly you, present fully, body, blood, soul, and divinity, then okay. Okay then. And it's like the perfect example of like, you just have to take the action, take that leap of faith, and then the feelings will follow. I just have to believe in my heart of hearts that is truly Jesus Christ in that host. So yeah, it's like, I could go on for another hour and a half just about the blessings that I've received, that I've come to know, and the people I've met, and just growing closer to the Lord every day, trusting him fully. There is so much more to my journey. And as I like to say, my conversion is ongoing. It doesn't stop. I'm continually learning things. We all are. But that was the initial, what drew me back to the faith, or like I said, what drew me to the faith for the first time. So I really hope this resonates with a lot of you. Maybe you relate, maybe you don't. Whatever it may be, I'm just grateful to be here sharing this with all of you. I'd love to make more videos talking about the faith, sharing it. I'd love to explain things. I really want to be to whoever may be watching this, what I would have liked at the time, what I had to some degree of, hey, I don't get this. Like, can you please explain this? Like I said, I'm still learning. I am still on this journey with all of you, but I'm so grateful to be here. And I'm so grateful for what the Lord has done for me and what he is doing for all of you. He is working in your lives, whether you realize it or not. He is. He is truly present. He loves you. He knows you. He knows who you are. He knows every hair on your head. And he wants a relationship. That's what he wants. He does not want you to just bend the knee, in fear, okay? He wants a relationship with you. So if you're looking for that missing piece in your life, maybe stop. Just stop. Pause and say, God, I give myself to you. It can't hurt. It certainly can't hurt. But anyway, I'm going to leave it there. I thank you all for watching. May peace be with you. I'm praying for all of you. God bless.